What's up, my wizards? It's Dev, SBMTG. We like it of magic, and today we're on the couch for one of our world-famous certified fresh list videos for y'all. It's time to talk about the top 20 budget cards in Standard that you should be playing. You know me, I love me some budget magic talk, and there's a lot of cards right now in Standard not seeing like literally any play. Everyone's forgotten about them, and they need a spotlight, and I'm just the guy to do that. But before we get into it, YouTube plug, like the video if you possibly can. Okay, that's pretty much it. Let's go. I guess you could also subscribe too, if you wanted to. But anywho, let's go ahead and get into it here, because we got a lot of cards to talk about. There's 20 on the list, plus my honorable mention, Vengeant Vampire. The only reason I bring this card up is because this is the card that you are least likely to actually even know it exists. Now, I'm pretty sure the only way that you'd know this card actually exists is if you'd picked up or received a core set gift package, which these came in, along with 4 other rares, but this is easily the best of the cycle for my money. Probably not going to see Standard play anytime soon. It's 6 mana for a guy that gets lava coiled and doesn't proc his death trigger, but a 4/4 lifelink, it gets through one time and it takes the game over, and your opponent is kind of forced to kill it, but if they use most removal spells in the format to actually kill this thing, then you get to take out one of their guys at the same time too, which is obviously not a bad dice trigger at all. So I won't say this card's going to see Standard play tomorrow because I highlighted it in this video or anything. It's still kind of bad in some ways. It's not exactly the rate you want to pay for something that can just get lava coiled, but it's definitely a better card than people would give it credit for if they're even aware it existed. Let's go ahead and start the actual list here with number 20, Conquerors Galleon. Okay, so you've almost certainly forgotten about this card. I really don't get why it doesn't see at least a little bit more play. Again, there are arguments against it. Mostly that Standard has this glut of incredible 4-drop cards. But I guess you could also make the argument that even if Standard didn't have so many playable 4-drops in it, people probably still wouldn't really take this card seriously, and I don't get that. People don't tend to like cards with high crew costs, vehicles with high crew costs. I definitely understand that, but if this thing attacks even once and lives through combat, it doesn't have to hit for combat damage, it just has to live through combat. You flip it over, and suddenly you have maybe, and I'm not trying to over-exaggerate here, but maybe one of the better late-game card advantage pieces that you could possibly have available to you. An entire Standard format. This thing can loot for a low cost. It can just produce mana. It ramps you when it flips over, so that's kind of good, But can also just straight draw you cards for less than an Arch of Araska. Nothing wrong with that. People play Arch. They don't have to pay 4 mana to play Arch in the first place. So I guess there is that. But it's this last ability that I really like on this card, If they can't deal with this, and I'll point out that there just really aren't a whole lot of main deck ways of taking out artifacts right now that people are playing. It's not like we're in Kaladesh block anymore, There's not a Braid in every deck. So this thing's a little bit safer to play, and once you actually do happen to get it flipped over, then can you just bring stuff back from your graveyard every turn? That's a really good card advantage engine. Also, just for what it's worth, both sides of this card have absolutely stunning, gorgeous, amazing art, but that doesn't have anything to do with the function of the card. Just wanted to point it out. I guess, long story short, I ship this. But here we are, number 19 already, you guys. Number 19, the Gangsta Lina. Lina Selfless Champion is another card that is 6 mana. I get why people don't want to pay 6 mana. Look at all the stuff this thing does. It requires you to have a somewhat developed board to get the most value out of it, and that's probably something else keeping people off of it, but it's probably not super hard to get at least 5 power on 3 different creatures when this thing enters the battlefield. And then it can protect your team from Akaya's Wrath, Deafening Clarion, Ritual Soot, whatever, number of different sweepers, or just give you this insane advantage in combat. As far as sweeper protection goes, I know people probably don't want to pay 6 mana for sweeper protection when all the sweepers in the format are 3 and 4 mana. Totally get it. Doesn't protect you from the first one, protects you from every subsequent sweeper after that. The only problem is that the decks that would probably want to play this are more aggro-oriented, and they just don't want to play 6 drops in the first place. But green-white tokens or something, I could maybe see dedicating a slot to this and just seeing how it works. Number 18, another white legend here. Tushar, and I know a lot of people are Pshaw to Tushar, but it's a fine card. Not for the birds, let's say. This thing is yet another card that's going to end up generating you a lot of card advantage over the course of a game. And it's not too hard to build your deck around this. I guess that's one of the worst things about it, is that you kind of have to. You have to have a bunch of historic cards in your deck, and then a bunch of stuff you can actually bring back with Tushar. So this does have opportunity costs, and you have to build like most of your deck around it for a card that gets shocked. Yeah, that's a 4-mana guy that can just die to shock. So again, with these first 10 entries, I kind of understand, and I'll give you some of the arguments for why people don't play them, but this thing is a ridiculous card advantage machine that shouldn't be too hard to stick in the relative late game and get some real advantage off of. But number 17, speaking of ridiculous engines that if you can stick them to the board, they just take the game over, Ariel. Ariel is so good. So a lot of people have played Black White Knights. Don't have to tell you that, especially a lot of my viewers have really been on Black White Knights. I don't know if any of you guys still are, but I know that for a time there, everyone was. So everyone has at least tested out Ariel. And there are some differing opinions on this card. And I will say, you know, again, we've got a glut of really good 4-drops in the format. There's some stuff that probably outclasses this. Hello, Waverly. But for the most part, especially if you're in a Knights deck, this is a great card. If it sticks for even one turn and you get just one activation of either one of the abilities, it's pretty decent. You get another body on the battlefield or kill one of their guys. But if it sticks for more than 1 or 2 turns, it completely takes the game over. 2-for-1s them, 3-for-1s them by killing multiple creatures or putting extra dudes on your side of the field. This thing just really does everything if it's allowed to stick to the board. Now, so far, I've had some arguments against most of the cards that are on the list. I kind of understand why they don't see much play, but I'll never see why Lara Croft doesn't see more play. Tomb Robber, I've been on this card since Ixalan came out, which feels like forever ago at this point, you know? I guess one of the only really, like, big arguments you can make about this is, like, in a Chain Whirler format, this is a bad card. You know, you don't want to pay 3 mana for a 1 toughness creature, even if Chain Whirler weren't in the format. You know, I don't want my 3-drop to die to Fanatical Firebrand. There's your argument. But honestly, there's a lot of decks that could utilize this to extreme advantage. You know, it's just 1 mana to not only discard a card, which you can easily turn into an advantage, but also explore, which can put another card into your graveyard and grow your Tomb Robber. You know, there's been a couple of decks that I've played Tomb Robber in the past. Not the recent past, I won't say that. It's been a minute since we cracked out Tomb Robber, but it's not hard to make this card, like, unreasonably big. pretty fast, and it facilitates any graveyard strategies that you might be running. I mean, 2 cards in the bin every time you activate this, as long as you don't hit a land off the Explore trigger, is actually really good for decks that are specifically trying to fill their graveyard. But speaking of 3-mana black creatures, 15 is Dreadshade, you know? Pretty much everything in this cycle of creatures that cost 3 mana of 1 color has seen a lot of play, except for Dreadshade, you know? The Banalish Marshal is everywhere. I don't have to tell you about Goblin Chain Whirler. Like, Steel Leaf Champion had its moment in the spotlight. Tempest Djinn, obviously, that's a big deal. But just no one cares about poor old Dreadshade, and I feel bad because this is a good card. Wizards, especially in the last few years, is a little skittish about the Shade ability, and a fire breathing, basically. Just pumping a creature for 1 mana. And this card is on rate. It's 3 mana for a 3/3, so at least it's not below rate or anything. And again, if it survives for 1 turn and you get to untap with it out, it can take the game over pretty easy. You've kind of paid 3 mana for something you're going to be attacking for 6 with on the next turn, if you do absolutely nothing else, including not drop a lane. Drop a lane, you can hit for 7 with this thing on an empty board, or just swing in and threaten to kill pretty much anything on the other side of the table if it blocks. Like, the threat of activation on this card is extremely high, and your opponent has a pretty high priority to actually block it. You know, if you swing with this and a board of like 2-3 other creatures, your opponent's pretty much forced to block it, because if they let it through, suddenly you have a pump spell on a body. You know, just like, it feels like an Arcbound Ravager sometimes. You know, if this gets through, suddenly it's dealing 1 billion damage. You know, something like Trample or even Death Touch or Menace would really, really help this out. But the lack of keyword abilities does kind of suck. But again, this card is all about threat of activation, and it's got that. But number 14 is the Hot Rod, Grand Warlord Rada. And I know that some of you are probably playing this in a deck that's extremely low to the ground, and this is the very tip top of your curve. This is a fine card, especially if you can find a way to ramp it out on turn 3. Suddenly you can produce a lot of mana. It's like, Hazaret rotated and people just completely forgot how good haste is. Haste allows the creature to do something to turn it enters the battlefield, which in some ways for me, when I'm evaluating cards, is the deal breaker. I want 4 and 5 mana cards to have an effect on the board the turn they hit the board. And this works pretty admirably. Not only does it get to attack the turn it hits the board, but it also gets to, pay for itself some of the time too. So what's wrong with this card? I'm not really sure. But here we are at number 13, Bone Daddy. Now, Bone Dragon is, again, it's not the best, obviously. For some reason, I think people are going to give me a lot of crap about putting Bone Dragon on this list. But I'm not going to back down, If you just get this back one time in a game, I think it's done its job. And in a perfect world, you want to actually play this for 5 mana and force your opponent to kill it so that you can get it back and effectively generate card advantage. But even if you have to pitch this into your yard to an effect in the early game, you kind of don't matter. It's still a safe card to pitch. And in some ways, in Standard, that's a really important designation. But you know how much love I have for 5 mana black cards. So number 12 is Open the Graves. The only reason I want this to see play is because Aristocrats is a deck in 2, 3, 4 different color combinations. Right now, there's black-red aristocrats, black-white aristocrats, Abzan aristocrats, Mardu aristocrats. There's a bunch of different decks that could really make good use of this card, especially considering how well it follows Teysa on curve. Teysa turn 4, Open the Graves turn 5, and suddenly you're going to have all the tokens. All of the lifelink vigilant tokens that you could possibly ask for. So I just think in terms of budgety, memey, combo, fun potential, I'm a little bit surprised that I haven't seen Open the Graves in more people's sort of casual standard aristocrats list this year, because this is the perfect piece for that deck. All I'm saying is keep an open mind and an open grave. But anyway, number 11 is Chamber Sentry. That's right, boys. Chamber Sentry. You knew it would be on the list. And yeah, this is kind of on here for trolley purposes because I'm for some reason known as the Chamber Sentry guy around these YouTube parts, even though he hasn't gone in a deck all season. I did have a lot of on display love for this card last season, and it still lasts through this season, where we have all of the shock lands, all of the gates, multiple different ways to fix our mana outside of that. We got Chromatic Lantern in this format still. We got Circuitous Route. Again, tons and tons of ways to play a 5-color deck and make this one of the best late-game value engines in the entire format. Let me say that for the 40th time. I know you don't believe me, but I'm telling you, if you can just consistently get this back from your graveyard, you've done two things. You have a recursive 5/5, which is good enough in and of itself, but the ability to actually hit stuff for damage by taking counters off of it makes this card unfreaking believable, and I will never understand why it's never going to get the fair shake it deserves. But here we are, top 10, everybody. These are the cards that I actually really don't get why they don't see more play. I'm not going to have a ton of arguments against these cards. So number 10 is Connive Concoct. Doesn't look like much, does it? Really doesn't, but this little thing is actually super powerful. Now, when resolved, let me make that caveat. When resolved against mono blue, this picks up pretty much every non-Tempest Gen creature in the deck, including those that are wearing a Curious Obsession, which is pretty decent for your 4-mana investment right there. But it's also going to pick up relatively small Wild Growth Walkers, even Hostage Takers, which is important some of the time, and a bunch of other creatures in this format. There's a ton of actually kind of really good stuff that you can pick up with a Connive right now. Just the first half of this card isn't bad, but there's a whole other half of it if you don't like the first one that's really, really good in the late game. This gives you a Surveil, allowing you to dump stuff from your yard or just get past bad cards if you want to, but it also just gives you information. You don't have to actually put any cards in your graveyard if you don't want to. People seem to forget that when evaluating Surveil. You can just put the cards back in the same order. It doesn't matter. If you don't want to pitch anything. But, if you do find something in that top 3 that you really like, or perhaps there's already something in your graveyard that you'd really like back, 5 mana is really not that much to, pay for a reanimation spell that's going to completely swing the game. So if you want something small on the opponent's side of the battlefield, you got that. But in the later game, when you're kind of in a war of attrition or you're just in a top deck battle, then this can just effectively convert into the best creature in your graveyard, and there's nothing wrong with that either. But here's number 9, The First Eruption. This is a saga that pretty much everyone has put out of their mind at this point. But I'm going to lobby for it just a little bit because I think there's some stuff going on with this card. It kills Mistcloaked Heralds. There's at least that. I don't think this card has a ton of play against Mono Blue, but I will say it's a little bit easier to resolve, especially if you're on the play. And once you do resolve it, kills their Mistcloaked Heralds, not their Siren Stormtamer. Sadly, it's non-flying creatures. But the next turn, it gives you enough mana to beat a Spell Pierce. That's kind of important. And then the next turn, it pretty much will kill everything aside from Tempest Chin and Mono Blue. So that's one reason to play this card, but there's also a pretty stock mono-white aggro deck right now, and a blue-white aggro deck that's essentially the same as the mono-white deck, but plays Deputy Detention and counter spells and stuff. And it's a really important deck in this format right now, too. And this is fantastic, even on the first chapter, against almost all of the one-drops in that deck. Like, you know what's funny is that Goblin Chain Whirler does this. You know, it doesn't exactly do this. It hits opponents and planeswalkers and stuff too. But Chain Whirler kind of does something very similar to this, and it's one of the most important cards. You know, since it came out, it's one of the most important standard cards, and everyone fears it. And every time you try to put one toughness creatures in a deck, people are like, "But Chain Whirler." Well, you know, this is another card that kind of acts a lot like Chain Whirler, which is probably why it doesn't see all the play. Is why would you not just play Chain Whirler? But Chain Whirler can't be a Deafening Clarion a couple of turns later. But number 8, everybody, is Dire Fleet Poisoner. And this and another card coming up I almost didn't put on the list because I feel like they see a lot of sort of casual play, you know. This is another card that I get people saying all the time when I make like mono black aggro decks, which I do every season. It's one of my favorite decks. People are often like, no Dire Fleet Poisoner, and I get that. You know, I'll tell people in the comments section like, oh, you could play Poisoner if you wanted to. Like, this is a good 2-drop. Especially for, obviously, a Pirates deck, where you get a little bit of extra value. But even if you don't get that extra little piratey value out of it, it's still a 2-mana, 2/2, flash, Death Touch, which is insane stats. That is really, really good. Me and a bunch of other people had this picked for one of the better cards when it in the set, when it was first spoiled. And it just has not lived up to those expectations. But honestly, you will never get me to believe that a bear with this much upside is a bad card. But number 7 is that other card I almost didn't put on the list, and that's Sarathy Awakener. This one I feel like is the biggest cheat on the list because sometimes, I mean very, very occasionally, you will see one copy of this card in certain lists, especially like the green-black lists last season. Occasionally you'd see an Asarath or even 2, but not very often. And honestly, even though this card did occasionally see some play, I still feel like it was criminally underplayed enough to make the top 10 of this list. This card should be played a lot more than it is. The absolute floor on the card is, again, a 3-mana 3/3 Death Touch, well above rate in some ways for me, for my money. So, again, this is just another card that I can't fathom why you'd have an issue with it. Like I said earlier, I want my cards to do stuff the turn they hit the field. And a lot of people feel that way. But this is one of those rare exceptions where I think the value is enough that it's worth, having to untap with it in play. Let me just put it that way. But here's number 6, Mesmerizing Benton, one of the few mythics on the list. And it's close too, you guys. It's like 97 cents. So it's almost $1, but that's mostly just because it's a mythic. You don't see this in pretty much anything nowadays. But I will say, okay, I have seen it as a one-of sideboard card on occasion, but for the most part, this card is absolutely nowhere, and I don't get it. The only complaint I have is that 5 mana sure is an awful lot, but this is a board in a box, puts 3 bodies on the battlefield the turn it enters play. It makes, attacking into your board state immediately impossible. Especially with ground creatures, it's just really, really difficult to attack profitably into this card, and very difficult to actually get rid of it too. 4/5 that's not terrible stats. It's not the best stats for 5 mana either. But tack the hexproof onto this thing, and it just becomes an unbelievable card. Hexproof is a notoriously ridiculous ability to have to deal with. I'll even go on a limb and say it's maybe the most hated ability in Magic. Hexproof is. So I don't have to tell you it's a good ability. But just, also the fact that it puts a couple of bodies on the battlefield to do nothing more than block some of the time. But that's still fine. You'll take it. 3 bodies. 4/5 Hexproof. The ability to freeze creatures down for a turn. Lock up the ground almost entirely. Why don't people play this card? But here's number 5, everybody. Chaos Wand. And I think there were probably a few people that were hoping this card was on the list. I've gotten a lot of like correspondence, mostly from patrons and stuff, that really like Chaos Wand. It's in a fair amount of the sideboards, especially of the decks that I doctor on Patreon, and I can see why, man. Like, those people definitely have the right idea. Like, if you can resolve this against control, knockout. Like, it'll win the game by itself occasionally, because you just get to cast their counter spells and their card draw spells and stuff. It's just an insane card when resolved, and especially on the play, it's not too difficult to resolve this. And like I said earlier with Conquerors Galleon, I think it's true here too. There's just not a whole lot of ways to break artifacts that people are playing in the main deck right now. So, like, you really don't have much to worry about in terms of losing your Chaos Wand once it hits the battlefield. It's one of the most stickable permanents in Standard right now. And again, against control decks, this will just completely take the game over, and there's not much they can do about it. But number 4 is Gorp Claw, Terror of Calcisma. This card's awesome. This is another card that my patrons really like. And it's not like this isn't a really important casual card. I think that in some ways it is, but I have yet to see it in a real, top tier, top table list, anything that finished in the top 8 or top 16. I cannot recall ever having seen Gorp Claw, and it's a pretty fine card, and there's a real deck for it nowadays. We just saw Nikya come out, I think that's its name, in the last set, the thing that just won't let you play creatures, or excuse me, won't let you play non-creatures. And along with Nullhide Ferox, we've got like a green-red 0 spells deck, and Gorp Claw is an incredible 4-drop for that deck. It decreases the price of any creature that you play after Gorp Claw, so that's great. It also boosts all your guys, gives them trample, including Gorp Claw itself, just like fine rate, man. Like, I don't want it to die to Lightning Strike either, but the rate on this is really, really admirable for what it actually is. We're getting there, you guys. We have hit the top 3. Bet you didn't even realize we were that far into the video. I don't know. We've probably been going for a while now. But anyway, number 3 is another 4-mana green creature, just like the last one. This is Zagana, though. I think this is a little bit better than Gorp Claw for all intents and purposes, It can get really big. If you wait 1 turn, if you can untap with this in play on your 5th turn, you can make it an 8/8, like one of the biggest creatures in the format, right up there with Gate Colossus. Beats Carnage Tyrant in combat, but the big attraction here is the fact that in a lot of decks you're going to put this in, it pretty much automatically draws you a card when you play it. And a 4-mana 4/4 that draws you a card is freaking nuts. An enormous threat that immediately replaces itself is just worth playing. Well, we're all the way up here at number 2, you guys, and as far as I'm concerned, this is the spiciest inclusion on the entire list. My number 2 is Whetherlight. Can I make the argument about there being no artifact removal in the format again? Can I make that argument one more time? Thank you. That argument. Let's put it right there. This also doesn't die to Lava Coil, though. That's pretty important right now. So lots of reasons, I think, to play this card. And no, it also doesn't die to Cast Down. It's legendary, so that's kind of neat, There's a lot of, this slips a lot of removal right now, is all I'm saying. And even though, like I've said a million times in this video, there's a glut of good 4-drops in this format, I still think it's probably worth inserting Whetherlight as a 1 or 2 of into certain decks, especially Orzhov or Mardu Angels. When you think about it, that deck plays 4 Lyra, a copy or 2 of Shalai a lot of the time. Sometimes you'll see Aurelia in the Mardu or red-white versions of those decks. So there are kind of a lot of historic cards in that deck. You could also put in like Treasure Map, History of Benalia if you wanted to. There are a lot of historic cards that could easily slot into a, an Angels mid-range deck and make it to where, Whetherlight pretty much always gets you a card when it does get through. And card advantage on a flyer that hits for 4, yeah, it's good. It's just objectively a good card. But we're here. Number 1, you guys. What could it possibly be? It's Sun Cleanser. Weird number 1, right? Actually, I think that this is easily, far and away the number 1. This was actually one of the easiest decisions to make about this list, was putting Sun Cleanser at number 1. Just the ability to murder a Hydroid Krasis on sight as soon as you play it is good enough. That's pretty good. But also, whatever creature you hit with it can't get counters put on it for the rest of the game, which will also be somewhat important sometimes with like adaptable creatures. Like this will reset an incubation druid, or sometimes even a Zagana if they're actually playing Zagana. So there's a few reasons to play this card right now. I mean, I won't go out on a limb and say that this is main deckable or anything, but there are plenty of edge situations that might make this actually worth the sideboard slot, and I honestly don't think that's debatable, you know? Just 2 mana for a thing that will absolutely slaughter a Hydroid Crisis, no matter how big it is. That's a good deal in and of itself, but it also leaves a body on the battlefield, and in the early game, it's obviously one of the better blockers in the entire format on the ground. So yeah, Sun Cleanser is a good card. It's not a controversial statement, it's just a good card. But if there's anything I didn't point out at all in this video, let me know down there in the comments section. What are your favorite budget cards in this format? And I'm always happy to hear from you. I read your comments, so let me know how you feel about it. Aside from that, if you wanted to order any of these, you know, like maybe some of these do look a little promising to you, want to try them out, just click the first link in the description, go over to TCG Player, and I have all these cards arranged for you in a list. Pretty convenient. Aside from that, another call for the YouTube stuff. You know, all you got to do is like the video, subscribe if you haven't done it yet. I'm trying to get to 110,000 now, so really help me out. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't done it yet. Really mean a lot to me. Bell for the notifications. You know that by now. You watch enough YouTube. And if you really like my face and my content, especially my content, or my cats, then just head over to the Patreon. I'll leave a link in the description for you. $1 every 30 days is all I ask. Not too much. I'll try to give you value for your buck. I'll let you vote on what decks you want to see on the channel, what videos you want to see on the channel, and I'll let you know what we're doing 24 hours in advance. All that for $1 a month. So if you can afford it, hit the link in the description. Help your boy out on Patreon. But I am pretty sure that is all for you dude today. So I'll catch you cats later. I'm Jeff from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.